The carrot you ate this week is orange. That seems obvious until you realize it shouldn't be. Carrots are not naturally orange. They were not orange for most of the 10,000 years humans have been cultivating them. The orange carrot is, by historical standards, a recent invention, and one of the most persistent myths in food history is the story of how it happened. Most people who know anything about carrot history know one thing. The Dutch made carrots orange in honor of William of Orange in the 17th century. This is a great story. It is also mostly wrong, or at least dramatically oversimplified. The real story of how the carrot became what it is involves 10,000 years of human convenience. A plant that started out as a medicinal weed, a geographic accident that mixed two different breeding traditions on the same trade routes, and a specific moment when human preference, not royal loyalty, locked in a color that now defines one of the most consumed vegetables on Earth. Start with the wild carrot. Daucus carota, the wild ancestor, is native to Central Asia, Afghanistan, Iran, the surrounding highlands, and it looks almost nothing like what you buy in a supermarket. It is thin, branched, woody, white or pale yellow in color, and intensely bitter. The root is not a food you would eat willingly. It exists as a reservoir for the plant's energy, designed to survive cold winters and fuel the next year's growth, not to be palatable to passing animals or useful to foraging humans. The above-ground parts of the wild carrot, which you may know as Queen Anne's lace, the white-flowered roadside weed, smell pleasantly herbal. The root does not deliver on that promise. The wild carrot also contains significant levels of bitter terpenoid compounds and is tough enough in texture that eating it raw is closer to chewing a small, bitter stick than anything resembling a vegetable. Early humans in the Neolithic period who encountered it were not finding a delicious food. They were finding a root with some potential, one that smelled interesting, that survived in ground that other plants struggled with, and that, with sufficient preparation, roasting, boiling, extended cooking, became marginally edible and provided some caloric value. Not appealing. Functional. The cultivation of carrots began somewhere in the region of modern Afghanistan and Iran approximately 5,000 years ago, and the earliest cultivated carrots were purple and yellow, not orange. The purple color came from anthocyanins, the same pigment compounds that make blueberries blue and red cabbage purple. The yellow color came from xanthophylls, the same class of pigments responsible for yellow and corn. Orange is a combination of both pigment pathways operating simultaneously, and it was not what early carrot farmers were selecting for. They were selecting with the same lazy efficiency that drove the potato story and the banana story and every other domesticated crop story, for the qualities that made their lives easier. Larger roots that were worth the effort of digging, less woody texture that made cooking faster and eating more pleasant, less bitterness that made the result more palatable, and higher sugar content that made the vegetable taste like food rather than medicine. Nobody was selecting for color. Color was a side effect. The purple carrot was the dominant cultivated form for the first several thousand years. It spread from Central Asia westward through Persia into the Arab world, and eventually into medieval Europe, arriving in the Mediterranean region sometime around the 10th century CE, brought by Arab traders and documented in agricultural records from that period. The carrots described in Arabic agricultural texts from the 10th and 11th centuries are purple and yellow. Some are described as red. Orange is not mentioned with any prominence. The carrot that reached medieval Europe was an unfamiliar, slightly bitter, purple or yellow root vegetable that was used primarily as a flavoring and medicinal herb rather than as a primary food source. Here is where the European chapter of carrot history becomes relevant, because European agricultural conditions and European breeding preferences produced something the Central Asian and Arab traditions had not, the development of the modern orange carrot. And it happened through a combination of geographic accident, selection for qualities that happen to be genetically linked to orange pigmentation, and what appears to be deliberate Dutch breeding activity in the 17th century that has been exaggerated by later nationalist mythology into something cleaner and more intentional than the reality. The key mechanism is this. Orange pigmentation in carrots comes primarily from carotenoids, the same class of compounds that gives tomatoes their red, autumn leaves their yellow, and salmon their pink. Carotenoids in carrots include beta-carotene, alpha-carotene, and gamma-carotene, and they are genetically linked to traits that farmers in Northern Europe were selecting for independently of color. Higher carotenoid content correlates with higher sweetness and more tender texture in carrot roots. Sweeter, more tender carrots are more pleasant to eat, easier to cook, and more appealing to a population that was by the 15th and 16th centuries beginning to eat carrots as a vegetable rather than purely as a medicine or flavoring. When Northern European farmers selected for sweetness and tenderness, without any understanding of carotenoids, without any concept of the genetic link, they were simultaneously, accidentally, selecting for higher carotenoid content. And higher carotenoid content produces orange pigmentation. The orange carrot did not appear suddenly. It developed gradually through the 15th and 16th centuries in Northern European breeding traditions, particularly in the Netherlands and in Germany, through exactly the same mechanism that drove every other crop domestication story. Farmers choosing the easiest, most palatable option available, generation after generation, with no awareness of the genetic consequences. What the Dutch did in the 17th century was not invent the orange carrot from nothing. They refined and stabilized an orange carrot that had been developing gradually for at least a century, and they did so in the context of a sophisticated Dutch agricultural tradition that was, by the 17th century, among the most advanced in Europe. The William of Orange story, that Dutch farmers selectively bred orange carrots specifically to honor their royal house, is almost certainly a later embellishment that attached itself to a real historical association. Dutch political identity in the 17th century was deeply linked to the House of Orange-Nassau. Orange was a patriotic color. A vegetable that happened to turn orange through independent breeding processes would certainly have acquired nationalist significance in a context, and the narrative of deliberate royal tribute makes for a much better story than farmers selected for sweetness, and the color changed as a side effect. But the horticultural evidence does not support the deliberate tribute version. Orange carrots appear in European agricultural records and artwork before the specific political moment that the nationalist story requires. The color was the coincidence. The story was the embellishment. What the Dutch did do, genuinely and verifiably, was dominate the production and export of carrot seed across Europe during the 17th and 18th centuries. Dutch agricultural seed merchants, operating in the context of the Dutch Golden Age and the Dutch East India Company's extraordinary trade networks, were major distributors of vegetable seed to markets across Europe and beyond. The orange carrot varieties that Dutch farmers had refined became the standard commercial product distributed through those networks, which is how orange became the default color of carrots in markets from England to Germany to eventually the Americas. Not because everyone chose orange, because the Dutch had the most sophisticated seed trade infrastructure in the world during the period when carrot cultivation was expanding and the orange carrot happened to be what they were selling. This is how many of our food defaults actually get established. Not through universal choice, not through rational comparison of all available options, but through the dominance of a particular supply chain at the moment when broad adoption is happening. The orange carrot became the default carrot not because it was demonstrably the best carrot available. Purple and yellow carrots have been eaten for thousands of years, but because it was the carrot that the dominant seed supplier was distributing at the moment when carrot consumption was expanding from niche to widespread. Supply chains are decisive in ways that feel like taste, but are actually logistics. The modern carrot has been pushed significantly further by 20th century selective breeding, following the same logic of convenience that drove every earlier stage. The shape changed dramatically. Modern carrots are straight, smooth, and uniformly tapered because straight, smooth carrots are vastly easier to process mechanically and pack efficiently than the branched, irregular roots of earlier varieties. The flavor changed further towards sweetness and away from bitterness. The terpenoid compounds that made wild carrots bitter have been almost completely eliminated from commercial varieties. The texture was made more consistent and more tender, and the color was deepened and intensified toward the specific orange that now appears on every supermarket shelf, because consumers tested repeatedly by agricultural companies showed preference for deeper, brighter orange over paler versions. The baby carrot, which appears to be a small, immature carrot but is actually nothing of the kind, is the most extreme expression of modern convenience logic applied to carrot production. The baby carrot was invented in 1986 by a California carrot farmer named Mike Urosek, who was frustrated by the amount of carrots his operation was throwing away because they were too broken, too crooked, or too cosmetically imperfect to sell at retail as whole carrots. Urosek had an industrial green bean cutter modified to cut whole rejected carrots into short sections, which were then fed through a potato peeler that rounded and smoothed the edges into the rounded, miniature shape now sold as baby carrots. The baby carrot is not a variety. It is a processing step. It is a whole carrot that has been cut into pieces and rounded off, sold in a form that maximizes consumption of product that would otherwise be waste. The most convenient form of carrot on the market today is a manufacturing artifact, not an agricultural product, produced through industrial processing of carrots that were themselves already the product of thousands of years of convenience-driven selection. The nutritional consequence of all this selection is worth a moment. Beta-carotene, the carotenoid responsible for orange pigmentation, is a precursor to vitamin A. The body converts it, and vitamin A deficiency causes preventable blindness in millions of children annually in developing regions. The orange carrot is one of the most efficient dietary sources of provitamin A available in vegetable form. Nobody planned this. It happened because farmers selected for sweetness. Sweetness is linked to carotenoid content, and carotenoid content produces both the orange color and the beta-carotene. Convenience-driven breeding accidentally solved a nutritional problem that wouldn't be understood for centuries. The carrot got healthy the same way it got orange, as a side effect of people choosing the easier option. The wild carrot still grows as a weed wherever humans have carried it. Thin, white, bitter, woody, ignored by every agricultural system on Earth. Also genetically diverse in ways commercial breeding lost long ago. The carrot in your refrigerator is orange because Dutch farmers were selecting for sweeter roots in the 16th century, and sweetness is genetically tied to carotenoid content. It is the shape it is because a California farmer in 1986 modified a green bean cutter to save rejected product. It tastes the way it does because 10,000 years of farmers have been choosing the less bitter, more convenient option and calling it common sense. They were right every time. The carrot got better every time. And the wild plant that nobody would eat is also the only one that can exist without us. If this changed how you think about what's in your vegetable drawer, share it. Subscribe. Every week, the hidden history underneath the ordinary things you've never thought to question. See you there.